Hello, and welcome to the Center for Jewish History, and happy Hanukkah to all who are celebrating. My name is Tom Kasdan, and I'm Senior Manager of Programs and Events at the Center. A gentle reminder to please make sure your cell phones are silenced. Thank you. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the founding of the Center for Jewish History. For those of you unfamiliar with the Center, it is the campus to 5 partner organizations and has achieved recognition as a venue of unrivaled historical documentation, scholarship, and public programming. The collections of its partners comprise the largest repository of the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. For updates on the Center's many public programs, please sign up for our newsletter by visiting www.cjh.org. This evening, we are keeping the victims of yesterday's Bondi Beach Hanukkah attack and their family members in our thoughts. Tonight's program is Hannah Arendt, Facing Tyranny. Hannah Arendt was one of the most influential political writers of the 20th century. Based on her time as a political prisoner and refugee during World War II, she developed daring insights into the human condition, the refugee crisis, and totalitarianism. Her warnings about a crisis in American democracy during McCarthyism and Watergate continue to resonate today. It is particularly appropriate that our program is being held on Hanukkah, since the historical background of the holiday is that in the 2nd century BCE, the Maccabees and their followers faced and were victorious against the tyranny of the Syrian Greek ruler Antiochus IV. This program is being presented by the Center and one of its partners, the Leo Baeck Institute, which works to preserve and promote the history and culture of German-speaking Jews. We thank the Institute for its continuing partnership. The screening of tonight's documentary film is being co-sponsored by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, also known as the Claims Conference. The Center for Jewish History is extremely fortunate to have a long history of support from the Claims Conference, going back more than 20 years. Thanks to Claims Conference grants, we have processed and digitized hundreds of feet of archives related to the Holocaust and made hundreds of thousands of images of these materials available online for research. Just this year, our photographers digitized over 88,000 images, thanks to Claims support. We are about to launch a brand new project, realized thanks to the Claims Conference, Histories and Mysteries. This new initiative is dedicated to solving Holocaust-era mysteries through crowdsourced genealogy and expert research. It's about to launch online on our social media channels tomorrow, so stay tuned, or even better, join us to share and solve mysteries. We are extremely grateful for the generosity and the partnership of the Claims Conference in the past, tonight, and always. Our program tonight will proceed as follows. First, we will be privileged to hear introductory remarks from Gideon Taylor, president of the Claims Conference, and then from Michael Cantor, executive producer for American Masters on PBS, where Hannah Arendt, Facing Tyranny, premiered just a few months ago. Following the screening, Jeff Bieber, co-director and co-writer of the film, will moderate a discussion about its important themes with Leon Botstein, president of Bard College, and Leon Levy, professor in the arts and humanities, and Jialin Yang, senior ideas writer at the New York Times. We'll conclude with questions from the audience. If you wish to pose a question to our panelists, please write it on the index card handed to you at check-in. Please write clearly and briefly, and note at the top of the card if the question is for a specific panelist. We'll collect the cards toward the end of the panel discussion. I want to thank all of tonight's program participants in advance for enriching us with their thinking and wisdom. And I particularly want to thank Jeff Bieber for his key role in creating the powerful film that we're about to watch, and for his help with organizing tonight's program. I am now pleased to call on Gideon Taylor to offer his remarks.
Well, what an honor to be here in this remarkable auditorium, in this remarkable building. I have the honor to serve as president of the Claims Conference, which I think, as some of you know, is the organization which deals with restitution negotiations with Germany, with assisting Holocaust survivors, and with Holocaust education. And we are so proud of our partnership here with the center. Film has a unique power. It reaches beyond classrooms, lecture halls. It brings history to the public square. And as a medium, it allows Holocaust education engage wider, more diverse audiences, invites reflections on what happened and how and why these stories still matter. So for the Claims Conference, film has in recent years become an incredibly important way in which for us to support ways to educate, to teach, to make people think. And I think it's a challenge. The subject matter of the film, Hannah Arendt, just is such a subject that needs exploration, thinking about. It's not simply a question of facts. And in some ways, Holocaust education is about what and how, but it also has to be about why, and the thoughts, the ideas, the conflicts, the complications. And that's why we were particularly proud to support this film. I would like to thank the center, its CEO, Rio Daniel, for hosting the screenwriting, writer and director Jeff Bieber for his work on the film. Pleased that panelists, President Botstein of Bard College and Jialin Yang of the New York Times are here to share and shed light, because at the end of the day, Holocaust education is about knowledge, it's about information, and it's about thought, and it's about ideas, and it's about questions. So thank you for this opportunity to be with you and to join you, and I look forward to hearing the conversation and seeing the movie. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michael Cantor, and I'm pleasure to be here tonight on behalf of PBS and the American Masters Series. We are very grateful to the Claims Conference, to our major donor on this project, the National Endowment of Humanities, and especially to viewers like you who are supporting public media. Thank you. In addition to thanking Jeff, I want to recognize his co-director, Shana Gazid, who's here. Why don't you stand up quickly, Shana? So briefly, I worked with Ken Burns for about 5 years, and Ken argued that his films and most historical documentaries on public media are about helping us answer the question, who are we as Americans? I think that's kind of an interesting two-part question. Who are we, and who are Americans? And historically, American Masters, our series, has tried to answer that question by looking at cultural figures, musicians, Leonard Bernstein or Miles Davis or Carole King, and writers, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Amy Tan, and performers like Rita Moreno or Marlee Matlin, Dick Van Dyke. In fact, if you missed our Dick Van Dyke show this weekend, It will be streaming in honor of his 100th birthday, which was Saturday. It'll stream for the next month for free on pbs.org. Our next program in January is on Elie Wiesel. It's called Soul on Fire. So why, within our series, would we take on Hannah Arendt, a historian, philosopher, and political theorist? Well, my job in helping to curate and select these programs is as much about figuring out how to get them paid for and done well as it is to figure out what will resonate when the film finally hits the air. It's great to make a great film, but if it doesn't grab an audience, then it's not worth doing. Needless to say, Hannah Arendt facing tyranny is particularly resonant at this moment in time. Arendt herself was a refugee after fleeing the Nazis in Germany in the 30s to get to Paris. She was stateless, and under French law, she was separated from her husband and sent to an internment camp in the south of France, along with other women who were called enemy aliens. It strikes me that the questions surrounding enemy aliens and immigration are now some of the most pressing questions of our time. Our own Constitution cites unalienable rights that all people have. And Arendt wrote, "The right to have rights, or the right of every individual to belong to humanity, should be guaranteed by humanity itself. It is by no means certain whether this is possible because the present sphere of international law still operates in terms of reciprocal agreements and treaties between sovereign states." So tonight we gather to sit shoulder to shoulder in the dark and to think about this woman's life story, her thoughts on totalitarianism and fascism and the banality of evil. There's no question that she was courageous. You might disagree with her thinking at times and argue with her point of view, but she had the courage of her convictions. About 20 years ago, I had the honor of interviewing Maya Angelou, and she said this about courage. "Some philosophers say courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any virtue consistently. You can't be consistently fair, or kind, or true, or honest, or generous. None of these things. You can be anything erratically, but to be it consistently, you have to have courage." I hope you enjoy the film, and I hope we all have the courage to protect the inalienable rights of every person, both here in Hannah Arendt's adopted city and across the country and beyond. I'd like to think that that's who we are as Americans. Thank you.
So Hannah Arendt wrote a book about the American Revolution in which she felt that the council system of government, where people would meet in associations, community groups, was really the power of this republic, her homeland. So you all have index cards or cards you could write questions on. And I've been told to look at the clock, and at a certain time, you should pass the questions up, and I'll ask these people questions that you may have, because you're part of the discussion. But I want to start our discussion. Well, we have Leon Botstein, who, as you see, is in the film. And I also asked New York Times journalist Jillian Yang to join us because she's written fascinating essays about subjects that I think connect the history. As Hannah Arendt said, the past is present, right? There's a bridge, if you will, between the history that people have experienced, our country has experienced, and what's happening today. And I had a question much further down my list, but after the horrific massacre in Australia and the shootings at Brown, right, sorry. It just struck me that she talks about the difference between power and violence, if you will. And Leon, in the film, Hannah Arendt writes a letter to a teacher, Carl Jaspers, just 1 month after Senator Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and 3 months after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And she writes, "I'm working on an essay on power and violence. I'm trying to understand the experiences of recent years here, power and violence are not the same. The power of the laws or the Constitution rests on the consent and support of the people. Wherever this power is intact, violence is unnecessary. Leon, what was Hannah Arendt afraid of in terms of political violence?
Well, I'm not sure I have a very good answer. So, as you know, I'm here really because I was a student of hers, and she played a very important part in my life from the age of 16. So I'm a living witness, and the film is terrific, Jeff, and you can sense her presence. She made a deep impression on me, who also came as a small child, as an immigrant to the United States. So the answer to the question lies, and one of the things I know you and I discussed, that Jaspers is never mentioned. And he, in my opinion, was the great intellectual influence on Hannah, not, we talk about Heidegger, but really Jaspers. So I think the answer is that violence creates the same fear and cowardice and passivity. The hiding under a desk, which is the natural response in the face of violence, is that terror is based on violence. And since terror is so important to totalitarianism, that the dream that she had, and you see it in The Human Condition and the book she wrote, is that language is ultimately the way humans should negotiate between themselves and among themselves. That language is what makes us have the possibility of happiness, love, friendship, whatever you want to call it. And that the opposite is between violence, brute force, and speech. And that in her mind, the ideal society was one in which speech was action. You could talk and persuade someone which is why lying is so terrible, even though the fact is that we tell stories and finding what the truth is very hard. But language is just the crucial instrument of the realization of what is human. And so that's the opposition. That power, which is political power, can be exercised, but its violence is, its physical presence is diminishes the courage of the human to act and to speak, and that's why it's so terrifying.
Gia-Lynn, you wrote in September, after the killing of Charlie Kirk, you wrote an article titled, "Political Violence Isn't New, but Something About This Moment Is." What did you mean by that?
You know, when that happened, I was struck that people were immediately trying to slot the event as, you know, left or right, and it was almost like this horrifying thing was becoming fodder for our partisan fights. And I'd noticed, you know, I'd worked at the Times for many years now, every time this event happens, people run to their corners, even before facts are in, really, and they begin to distort facts, honestly. And so it struck me that we kind of keep trying to make these events feel like what's happened before, which are usually more organized. If you just think about the 60s and 70s, there are radical groups. There's some kind of actual sort of politics happening in a way between people organizing themselves, and yet these events that we keep seeing, I'd say the Kirk killing, the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, in the summer of the election, even I would say the gunning down of the United Healthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan. These events just don't feel like that. And in a way, the something new is, well, and I feel like Arendt is an incredible thinker about sort of what is novel, what is different now. And it just struck me that these actually feel more like mass shootings in a way. They're people who just they're not even registered to vote. They're not voting at all. You know, the guy who killed Charlie Kirk didn't even vote in the 2024 election. And so these are people who have become somehow deeply isolated. They're committing very political acts of violence, and yet they themselves, I'd say, are not in a way practicing politics. And so I was just trying to understand, like, instead of, again, immediately saying that guy's from the other side and he's part of our political system, why would all these people leave no trace of their motive in a way? They've sort of left the political system. And so what does it mean to have political violence that feels divorced from politics itself?
Leon, you're shaking your head.
I don't, I think I understand what you're saying. I don't quite agree. What's shocking about that is how meaningless it is. In other words, it's not shooting Martin Luther King or Robert Kennedy or John F. Kennedy. I frankly didn't know who Charlie Kirk was until he was dead, and certainly not the healthcare executive. So what is frightening about it to me is the ubiquity, the ease, the carelessness, and the speed with which we forget. We have forgotten about the Sandy Hook, people who are killed. We've forgotten. They're so ubiquitous that there seems the bottom has fallen out of any sense of security and stability in the country. Anybody can get a gun and shoot anybody, and the targets aren't political. I'm not surprised they didn't vote. They're not political. And the attempt to turn them into politics is their personalized grievance, and there's a sense of absolute, they're detached from, they don't see any benefit. There's a kind of hopelessness and devaluation of a human being's life. We're so inured to this. There's so many people being killed so often that we've lost the ability to feel. So I don't think there's anything political about it. It is, and especially with internet and social media, there is the rage against, see, we talk about the inequality of wealth. You know, Elon Musk and all those people who are richer than sovereign nations and the rest of the population. There's the inequality of fame. There's no middle class of achievement and satisfaction. There's massive popularity, the influencer at the top, and then you have anonymity and who cares whether so that any kind of fabric of community seems absent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you begin to look at each case, there is a kind of despair that is incredibly deep, and I think what makes it difficult for us to process each one is they're quite unpredictable because there is a lot of despair.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that Hannah Arendt, at the very end of Origins of Totalitarianism, and she wrote this in the second edition, writes about loneliness as a key ingredient for totalitarianism. And it's fascinating because she's talking about existential loneliness, a sense of we live in a period of great change after World War I. There was a lot of change taking place, and people felt disconnected. So, Leon, what does existential loneliness have to do with totalitarianism or authoritarianism?
So I think you make a good point. I learned something from her, which was the distinction between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is a virtue, where you contemplate, you study, you concentrate. Solitude is being by yourself, which is something very few Americans know how to do, and spend time by themselves concentrating and not everything in groups. That is not something bad, but loneliness which is a disconnection from any other human being. You're absolutely right. And what has to do with the totalitarianism is that this is so simple. It's obvious that when you in the film you make the point. She makes the point that Hitler mobilized people who were forgotten by the political process and the parties. Nobody paid attention to them, right? And so that is I think, the key to the explanation. A lonely person, a person who seems disconnected, feels rewarded by being part of a group, a gang. You look at the stormtroopers that later, the SA, not the storm, the SA when Hitler finally decided to get rid of them, but they drew their strength from precisely the disconnection and the being overlooked and ignored, and we see that in the American white backlash in the Rust Belt against immigrants, against people of color, who they think they've been privileged. There's no evidence that that is actually the fact, but they feel they're forgotten, overlooked, taken for granted. And so loneliness makes a person vulnerable to these mythic solutions. You know, in your film, there's a lot about these lies becoming reality, and that's absolutely right. You could do it in different language, myths, you know, that people will no longer, especially in our public space, Arendt had this view of public space being the way politics is negotiated. Our public space is online. And in that public space, it's very hard to convince anybody that what they believe might actually be wrong. You very well said, nobody believes in anything. You can't actually convince people of something that we would reasonably call facts, that there is some truth. Take the vaccine issue. And the camouflaging of lies as facts, which of course Watergate did too. So yeah, loneliness is a terrible, terrible condition which is easily manipulated, especially in the current skill with which these companies have understood the algorithms of our emotions.
Well, in 2023, Gillian, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, issued a report about an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So help us understand the connection between that and these individuals who are committing these horrible acts of murder, because on the bullets of some of these people are, you know, slogans or sayings, and yet they're lone actors here. What's going on?
And that report I thought was so interesting because that felt to me like the first time someone was saying nationally that the feeling of being lonely, which we all have, right? It's like an emotion, is actually a threat to both your health individually, but also to society. And I think, you know, having worked on coverage of far too many shootings, I have to say, over the years, it is striking how many of them really are people who just feel lost to the world. You know, in so many cases, the person has cut off contact with loved ones. They are living, as, you know, President Botstein was just saying, like they're living online, they're in a dialogue with people that they don't know personally. I think about Arendt's ideas about political participation and persuading others and being persuaded. How can you do that if you're sitting alone and you haven't left your home and you are kind of in a conversation with an online void, I'd argue. And suddenly the things, you know, your sense of reality, I think, gets distorted, and then we see these acts of violence that feel inexplicable. And I think there's often, as journalists, when we begin to look at sort of what precedes it, there's a feeling of a person who's sort of been lost from society, and they are profoundly isolated in ways that feel existential, and in a way they can only, a lot of them end in suicide because the person is sort of, that's it. They have nothing really to say, in a way. Their last act is just a horrifying act of violence.
So you know, it's interesting. I think what you say is persuasive. I think that if you look at through the lens of Arendt just for a moment, there's another explanation for this, and which is less. So much of this seems to me thoughtless.
Yes.
And momentary. These are not people who have thought this through. Yeah. You know, they're not that the real impact of the Holocaust is so to reduce the taboo on respecting life, that the anonymity, the mass industrial scale in which people were killed by perfectly privileged people killing them, that broke a dam which we can't repair, which is to the horror of the loss of life. So the person who shoots someone, the person who shot these students at Brown, it's not an act of thoughtfulness, it's an act of thoughtlessness and carelessness about life. You know what I mean? Yep. We dress it up as if it is an argument. Yep. I don't think there's an argument.
I completely agree. And I think, if you look at these cases, some of these people have left, etchings on the bullets, and they're utterly meaningless. And some of them have even become, frankly, jokes. In the Kirk killing, literally memes. And you could see actually when it happened, like people, journalists on cable news are describing, like, we've just got word of what's in the bullet casings, and they're like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. And it really is kind of a joke on everyone trying to draw meaning from this event in a way. It's like the person who does it knows that we're all gonna try to find thought, right, and judgment in it. And really there's nihilism. There's nothing there.
So, first off, please pass your cards down to the folks here. Let me switch gears a little bit. Leon, Hannah Arendt explores the role of anti-Semitism in the development of totalitarianism. And she argues that anti-Semitic ideologies were crucial for unifying the Nazi movement and creating a scapegoat for societal problems. And recently, after the National Guardsmen were attacked and one was killed, President Trump paused all immigration, and he wrote on Truth Social, all third world countries to enable the US system to he stopped immigration from all third world countries. And he attacked Somali immigrants, calling them garbage. And can we draw parallels between Arendt's analysis of anti-Semitism as a scapegoat and the use of scapegoats in contemporary political discourse today?
Well, I would say that one of the most important things is that she resisted the reductive generalization of types. So take the shooting of the guardsmen and the identification of extending all the blame to all Afghans, right, or Somalis, right? In that case, we would remove the society of all white men, because they're the majority of the shooters in our history, right? So we're gonna extrapolate from one person's. She believed, and that's that very famous overused exchange between herself and Gershom Scholem. He accuses her of not having love for the Jewish people, and she says she doesn't think in terms of people. She resists those generalizations, and she is really a believer in the individual, in thinking in what differentiates one person from the next and the sanctity of every individual. So one thing is that anti-Semitism is an extremely plausible conspiracy theory, and a very old one, the oldest one, and it's still in play today. And that it is not so much a unifier of the Nazi movement, it was the explanatory hypothesis which allowed a lot of different kinds of people to join in. It was the common ground. And that we want to believe. See, what I fear, which I think she was also frightened of, is that freedom is difficult. And the exercise of freedom and citizenship is very time-consuming. And people, and China has shown this, would much prefer to be comfortable and not be bothered. And people don't want to free, but people love to complain. And people love to blame somebody other than themselves. In a democracy, we are responsible for what happens, even if we fail to win a campaign or convince our fellow citizens. We have to put the effort in. Did we really put the effort in? No, we didn't put the effort in. So, but let's say the Hungarians or the Poles, after the fall of the Second World War, the victory of Stalin, they lived for decades, and in some way they thrived on the ability to blame their own helplessness. So maybe our fellow human beings love being under tyranny, and they really are not willing to do what's necessary to be free.
Okay, so I'm going to go to your questions. We have about 20 minutes or so. So, question number one, and I think, Gillian, I'll ask you this. Are there any distinctions between the totalitarianism of Nazi Germany and the Trump white Christian nationalist totalitarianism that we are seeing today? Now, again, these are not our points of view, they are your questions, and we're asking these questions. And please.
I mean, I think there are serious parallels to contemplate, right? So if you imagine part of her theory of how you get totalitarianism is you get sort of this like supranational mythology of a larger story that you can tap into. It's not a reality that you would intuit yourself necessarily, but once someone gives you the big story of history, right, and how you play a part in it, suddenly all kinds of things can be justified. All kinds of people become dehumanized because they're not part of your large, narrative that you're doing. The Christian nationalists, if you listen to some of the people, and these are a minority of Americans, but some of them are deeply influential in the Trump administration, I hear from them big narratives, right? They have big narratives about, we lost the country, there's all kinds of things you'll hear, like, higher education, like, lost God, hundreds of years ago, we have to get it back. We need to get back to sort of blood and soil nationalism. There's just, again, this larger story being told. And I think once people kind of slot into that, I think the fear from someone like, that you can learn from Arendt's writing is she's saying this, look for the elements, right? And one thing that I think about from her writing is look for that element of that kind of self-aggrandizing mythology that a person can get really intoxicated by, and suddenly they find themselves doing things that they never would have done before.
I have to say, though, that America is going to be 250 years old in 2026, July 2026, and we have a history, especially during the Civil War, where I think 700,000 Americans were killed, and after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, there began to become a mythology of the lost cause of the South, that the South was really fighting for states' rights, and it wasn't about slavery. And you could see that mythology permeating what's happening today in terms of white Christian nationalism, who's an American, who is not an American. I mean, Gillian, you wrote an amazing book about immigration between 1924 to 1965, and we also saw, in 1924, there were a series of bombings that had taken place by anarchists, I guess. That was one of the reasons why, but amongst many other reasons why, the doors of immigration completely shut, as well as you had people like Henry Ford in the newspaper in the Dearborn Independent, I think, railing against the Jewish conspiracy and wanting to stop immigration. So, we could compare it to totalitarianism, Nazi Germany, but America has gone through cycles of both violence, creating mythologies, blaming immigrants. I guess, Leon, or first Gillian, because you wrote that book, it's kind of like, can we draw parallels between Nazi Germany and today? Yes, but we could also draw parallels between American history and today, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's why immigration is such a powerful lens to understand these debates. It is all about how we define who counts as American and who does not. And there have been just some of the most, I would argue the bitterest, most violent battles in the country's history have all been about, this is maybe a lofty assertion, but I would argue they've been about who counts as American. And so the immigration debates of, are you a citizen, do you have a visa, I think we can get caught up in sort of the paperwork of it. But fundamentally, as we see from this beautiful movie, the government can change where the lines are. One day you're a citizen, and then the next day your paper has been ripped in half. One day you have the right paper to leave a country and save your life and your family's. The next day, the other family doesn't get the visa. And so I think, yes, in our own history, we have not fully, I would argue, really settled the question of who counts as American. And that's what makes this moment with the Trump administration so high stakes and important in our country's history.
Well, the Supreme Court is now considering a case of just that. They're going to look at citizenship, birthright citizenship, if you will. And indeed, I think the case was in 1898 of a Chinese American who was awarded to be an American citizen because he was born in this country. And the Supreme Court passed that. Now they're looking at it again. I wanted to go to another question because I'm getting a lot of cards about the Eichmann trial.
Before I get to the Eichmann trial, I want to say that I'm going to strike a note of optimism here. With all due respect to Donald Trump, he's a petty kleptocrat, and therefore he's a narcissist, he's a performer. He doesn't carry, in my view, the weight or have an organization or have a movement that can be compared to the Bolsheviks, to Stalin, and to the Nazi Party. He's, in my view, dangerous, and he is in profound violation of his duties of office. We elected him. We're responsible. We permitted him to be elected. He was freely elected, and we have to find a way, without violence, to rid ourselves of the president. But it doesn't have quite the same, because there are so many factors that, as you say in the film, this is not a place that is, she says it when she gets here, it's not a homogeneous country, really. It doesn't have a common history. It's harder to pull this off. And there's the economic necessity of immigration, which is going to come on us like a thunderbolt, everything from elder care to agriculture. So there is, there are the economic realities. So I'm an optimist. I think this nightmare will be over sooner than we expect.
Bravo. I want to switch gears to another question. What do you think about the murder of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank? But I want to provide some context to that. So Hannah Arendt, 1930s, as you saw in the film, did work for Youth Aliyah and helped bring German Jewish kids and other Jewish kids to Palestine. At the time, in 1938, America closed its doors to immigration after the Avion Conference. And she felt that Jews needed a home, and I think what she meant also is a place to participate in politics. She also advocated for a Jewish army during the war. But when she went to attend the Biltmore Conference, in which Ben-Gurion was speaking about the creation of a Jewish state, she became very fearful because she didn't hear any mention of Arabs, and she firmly believed that the dangers of a nation state in Germany, where nation is about nationalism, right, who you are, if you're a white Christian, and state, the laws, if Israel became, she felt, a Jewish state without being, as she called for, a federated state of Arabs and Jews, it could go down a slippery slope, if you will. So I guess the question is, I don't know how to interpret this, but how do you put in context what's happening today in terms of Arendt's view of what could happen and what is happening?
So everything you say is.
Can I repeat the question?
Yeah.
The question on the card was, what do you think about the murder of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank? That was the question, but I was trying to put it in context of history and all of that.
The only thing to think about it is to be horrified by it. So about that, the murder of Palestinians. So what you say is accurate, that Arendt was like Judah Magnus and Martin Buber, a believer in a binational state. She believed in the idea of a Jewish homeland, but it was a complicated question because she believed to be fully human, you had to be a member of a body politic. You had to be a citizen. You couldn't be Robinson Crusoe. You couldn't be on the moon without a community, without a member, without being a citizen, an equal citizen. And the only place on earth where that was possible, possibly from America, was in a state in which the Jews had their own nation. But the nation had to be reconciled with democracy, and the only way to do that was to take into account the culture and population of the people who were there, the Palestinian population. So she was opposed to Ben-Gurion's solution, and she had a different vision of Zionism, which is ultimately, in my view, the right vision. How we get there after all that has happened is not obviously an easy question, but it has to be tried. So that there are people who believe that you cannot reconcile democracy with Zionism. Not possible. I'm not a person who believes that is true. And her ambivalence is, and she was ambivalent, because these were the Europeans that came to Israel after the war, where they were going to go. I mean, we got to America in the end of '49, but my parents had applied for a visa in the 1930s. 15 years it took to get a visa. You couldn't get a visa to the United States. So where were these people going to go? All the ships that were going to Palestine. And she realized that having a homeland was very important, but it should not be creating a second-class citizenship. It should be shared with the Arab population. And that's a utopian ideal which seems to be very hard we love to distinguish ourselves against someone who isn't ourselves and inflict cruelties on them, both ways. There are no saints in this conflict.
Jillian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I was rereading her essay on violence yesterday, just ahead of this event. And I was struck reading her. If you have not read her, I just can't recommend it enough. She kind of just gets you thinking in new ways, at least she does for me. And she's not going to tell you what's going to happen or what to do, but she does have a way of, for me, turning something around in a different perspective. And I was thinking about Gaza reading her yesterday because she has this kind of confusing, provocative idea that I think that's in the film, and maybe you brought up too, Jeff, that power and violence are actually, not only are they not the same, they're the opposite. And true power comes from, I think, in my civic participation. People, you're a leader, but you have people behind you, right? Who kind of want you to act in their stead, but it's a group of people with power. And that violence happens when you don't have power. And violence can certainly, overpower a person, but more violence does not lead to, she says, it doesn't lead to more power. And so, she actually cites the Vietnam War as an example. There's a guerrilla war. The United States has all of the violence, right? Has all of the military might, and yet it doesn't have power. And so I think for all of these conflicts around the world, just for me, for anyone who hasn't read her, you could read all of it, really. But that essay, if you want to think about Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, it's just for me, it was a provocative way to think about it.
So one of the subjects that I know divides people is the Eichmann trial and the banality of evil. And I've gotten a number of cards, and I'll try and sum it up here for Leon. Was Hannah Arendt implying that Eichmann was an example of someone following a leader, like all people do, to allow fascism? They just don't think, so they are therefore not at fault.
So in the sequence you showed in the film, when Hannah Arendt was buried, and we had the day she was buried, which she's buried on the Bard campus, Hans Jonas and I and a bunch of people were in a forum, and he got up and said more or less what you see in the film, that that this was the biggest mistake of her life, this book, and he couldn't quite forgive her. For I had a different view, and so did my grandfather, who survived ghetto and camp, and who believed that it was the most candid and revealing discussion of the events. But what Hannah Arendt got wrong is she got the wrong guy. She had the right case, but the wrong guy. Eichmann fooled them. He was a real ideologue, a real believing Nazi. He thought for himself. He was filled with fanatical Nazi, and that we know from the work that was done on his behavior in Argentina. He played it brilliantly and she fell for the trap. But she's right on the merits that the killing and the murder could not have happened without the thoughtlessness and the stripping of the killing of human beings as something radically evil.
So I'll play what Roger Berkowitz counters Leon, because I did get another card saying, why did you choose to not cover that Arendt had gotten Eichmann wrong? Because Eichmann recorded to a Nazi in Argentina, and he was a virulent anti-Semite. She knew about these tapes, and she heard some of these tapes. And even though the guy was a virulent anti-Semite, it didn't supersede the fact that he didn't think about what he was doing when he murdered or transported all these people to there. Yes, he wanted these people to be killed, right?
Right.
But he was following the laws of the Reich, and he really wanted to succeed in that
totally.
way. And there were, as you say in the film, hundreds of people like him.
Oh yes, her real breakthrough was that what we would consider radical evil in humanity is not possible by devil. Don't look at Mephistopheles. Don't look at Richard III. Don't look at the devil in the Bible. We are the people who passively enable. She got that from Jaspers. Jaspers wrote a book in 1946 called The Question of German Guilt. And that influenced the whole Eichmann discussion because it's about varying stages of collaboration and how he tries to look at how the Nazi thing was made possible. So the thing that worries me about Arendt, always did him on this question is, yes, he was thoughtless, but if our civilization is dependent on people who can think in her standard of thought, we're going to walk into the philosopher kings of Plato. Then democracy is really in trouble because the people who operate democracy are largely thoughtless in her definition of what thinking is. You follow me? It's a level of self-reflection which few of us can measure. So suddenly this is really hard, but you're absolutely right. Even following order and doing that, even believing that hating a group, thinking in those terms, is in her mind thoughtless.
Right. Okay, so it's 9:30. I have so many more questions here. I like to keep going, but I've been told to cut it at 9:30. So Leon, Jillian, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Honor to be here. Thank you.